It all started when a girl with bright yellow hair read a book in which she saw the death of the main character. The girl, as soon as she read this, threw the book aside. She was very scared and at the same time angry. A lady immediately ran into her room with a puddle and asked if something had happened to her. But the girl was very angry, so she told her to leave the room immediately. The maid asked for forgiveness and left immediately. The girl herself tried to figure out what kind of book it was that was called The History of the Great Empire. She bought it, thinking it was just a regular historical chronicle, and the only reason this worthless book interested her was because the name of the main character coincided with the name of her fiancé, namely Ricardo. But later, she came across the plot and her own name. She was the only daughter of the noble Crawford family. The girl's name was Bianca, and she thought she would be the main character. But in the end, it turned out that she was the villain, who was supposed to be executed at the end. Bianca's fiancé was Ricardo, and he was a dark-haired, tall man who had a very handsome physique. His flawless face matched perfectly with his broad shoulders and long legs. He was not only the heir of one of the most influential dukes, but also an outstanding swordsman who became famous throughout the empire. In other words, he was the most perfect, so Bianca considered herself very lucky. This man also had a deep, downright charming voice, so she could listen to him for many hours. One great misfortune was that he was also the main character of that cursed book that the girl found and read. It was only natural that such an ideal man as he was the main character, but the girl, in turn, was not inferior to him. Her family, although of course not comparable to the duchy, also had considerable influence in society. She was also considered one of the first beauties of the empire. But the main character was not this beautiful girl at all. When Bianca went to have tea with her husband, she tried to remember the name of the main character that was mentioned in her book. This mysterious girl's name was Maria. She was the complete opposite. She was a simple lady, but then it turned out that she was even the illegitimate child of the Marquis of Wensbury. This girl moved to the capital from a remote village. She was certainly very beautiful, but also rude and uneducated, like all villagers. Of course, Bianca wasn't going to just give up her seat to a woman she'd never even heard of. Ricardo was never affectionate with his wife, but he also did not show contempt or any kindness towards her. He was always calm like a still lake. But in the book, this man was described as a man who was full of passion and love. Although he never showed such qualities with Bianca, the worst thing for the girl was that she simply could not stand the scenes where he and Maria indulged in unbridled love for each other. The books described these scenes in quite a lot of detail, and the girls felt disgusted by this to some extent. And being who she was, Bianca read them over and over again, analyzing every detail to figure out what she had missed. Of course, she was disgusted, and any other noblewoman would have fainted right there after reading this. But the girl was not like that at all. She wanted to know what was going wrong. Ricardo suddenly saw that her cheeks were red, and he asked if everything was okay with her because he was a little worried about her. The girl, who at that moment was remembering all these scenes and was a little embarrassed, immediately said that everything was fine, and she also asked if she could ask him one question. The man didn't object at all. Then Bianca asked under what circumstances he would be able to kill a person. It didn't take long to think about it, as the man immediately replied that it would most likely have happened in a war. But this answer was quite obvious, because this man was a veteran who had been through 2 wars. So Bianca wondered what could have motivated him to do this other than war. Ricardo was very surprised that she asked when he could kill someone. Also, like in the war, so he asked why she was suddenly so interested in it. In fact, the girl was interested because in the end he had to kill her with his own hands. But of course, she certainly couldn't answer that way. In the book, Bianca couldn't come to terms with the fact that Ricardo abandoned her and traded her for some country bumpkin. Her love for him was so strong that, blinded by jealousy, she unconditionally directed all her anger at Maria. And the girl was even ready to kill her. If it would help bring Ricardo back, she would do everything in her power. Bianca understood that she now aroused quite a lot of suspicion in him, so she told him to simply forget what she asked about. But the man had already found the answer to her questions and said that he would kill a person only in one case, if that person had harmed someone who was dear to his heart. And as soon as she heard this, she was amazed, because this is essentially how Ricardo from the book acted. The man, Then, getting up from his seat, said that the girl had been behaving strangely that day. At first she had blushed, and now she had become pale like a ghost. As soon as the drunk heard this, you blushed again, because it meant that he was worried about her. The same Ricardo she knew was interested in how her health was. He suddenly began to leave and advised the girl to rest better. She should not overwork herself, because it had a very detrimental effect on her health. Bianca decided that her assumption was wrong. Their wash was just a formal union between the families, nothing more. The girl did not argue with him and also wished him a safe journey, since the man had to go on business to another country. Then Bianca decided to go to the bookstore where she bought that strange book and return it. To her great surprise, the seller returned it and said that they definitely could not sell something like that. The girl was very surprised and asked what he was talking about because she had bought it in that store 3 days ago. The man explained that he had never even seen it in person and that the book did not have their tag, which was used on absolutely all the books in their range. He picked up one of the copies of the book and said that when the buyer took the book, they put a mark by removing this label. This was necessary so that they would not confuse the book bought from them with the one that was bought elsewhere. Bianca was very surprised to hear about this label, and the man also said that besides all this, he had been selling books for over 40 years, but had never seen such a name. He carefully examined the book given to her and said that historical stories usually contained the author's name in the title, and romance novels were not sold unless there was something intriguing in the title. Bianca, as soon as she saw the love stories with very piquant titles, immediately asked if this meant that he did not sell her this book. The seller immediately replied that this is exactly what he had been telling her all along. Bianca got a little angry. She looked at him with an icy gaze and said that if he lied to her, then she was ready to make him incarnate his own life for it. The man was a little surprised, because he had never been threatened because of a book, but he immediately said that this was not true at all and she could believe him. Before leaving, Bianca advised him to come up with a new way to label his books. She explained that someone could easily steal one of his books, rip off the label, and claim to have bought it there. The man, hearing this, thought about it and said that this was indeed true, since recently they had been experiencing an increase in thefts in their store. Then Bianca advised him that instead of removing part of the label, it would be better to mark the label with a special marker or a seal. Then thieves would definitely not be able to copy it. As soon as the man heard this, he simply beamed with joy and thanked the lady with all his heart for this wonderful advice and said that it was wonderful. Bianca, meanwhile, had already returned to the estate and put the book on her bookshelf, all the while regretting that she had not managed to return it. She was very tired, but still, for some reason, she could not stop and reread this book for several days. She simply could not tear herself away from it. But at that moment, a maid suddenly came to her and said that Sir Wellsbury was hosting a charity dinner that day. She came to the girl in advance to help her prepare for it. Bianca immediately remembered this and did not send away the maid, who at that moment began to put her hair and everything else in order for this dinner. The girl decided that it was best to just forget about this terrible book, because in any case, this story was complete nonsense. It was impossible that such a noble man as Sir Wencesbury could have an illegitimate child. And besides, Bianca didn't understand why Ricardo would have to leave her in order to be with a bastard. By that time, the girl had already put on a luxurious red dress that perfectly emphasized her figure and thought that she was simply amazing, so he definitely could not change her. But at that moment, the maid brought her several shoes to choose from and said that she also had to choose the shoes so that they would fit perfectly. As soon as Bianca saw those awful white shoes that the maid had picked out for her, she immediately wondered if she really thought they would go with that dress. The maid was immediately very surprised when she heard this, and the girl explained that she was wearing a red dress, and white shoes with a bodice would definitely not have suited her. The maid was very scared because she understood her mistake, but did not know what to do. They noticed that Lady Bianca was very angry about this, but the girl was not at all surprised, because for some reason the maid saw beauty differently than she did. Bianca guessed there was a reason she suggested those white shoes with such a fancy dress. At that moment, the maid immediately bowed and asked for forgiveness, saying that she had not made this mistake on purpose, but was definitely ready to correct it. But the head maid stood up for her and said that she was definitely ready to give her a severe reprimand. Bianca, hearing all this, was very surprised because she had simply asked a question, but sighing heavily, she asked that they simply bring her a pair of black shoes. Of course, she was aware that her maids were afraid of her, but she did not try to gain their favor. It was easier for her when they were on guard, so she wasn't going to change their relationship with each other. When some time had passed since then, the girl went to the event itself, where everyone was drinking and having fun. Bianchi was so bored, she couldn't even believe that she had spent so much time preparing for such an uninteresting event. The girls were even very sad about this. However, when Sir Winsbury told another very strange story, she said that his stories were as entertaining as always. The man laughed and said that he was very flattered to be praised by such a beautiful young lady. For him, this was the highest praise. Well, the girl replied that he had every reason to be proud, because he was the most famous lord of the empire. Of course, she was not at all interested in hearing about the number of enemies that the move had defeated, because this number was growing every time, and it was quite obvious. But she just had to listen to all this. But then suddenly, the man continued to smile and said that the days of his glory were already behind him. A new rising star of the empire. It was none other than Lord Vincazor. Ricardo, hearing this compliment, only smiled and said that the man was exaggerating a little, but he asked the guy not to be so modest because he really had something to be proud of. Bianca laughed with him for company, but she still didn't understand what this man was saying, and most importantly, why. But then, he suddenly asked when they both planned to get married. It was a rather awkward and unexpected question, so they were silent for a while. But Ricardo spoke first and said that they had to do this someday. In fact, first Bianca waited for her deputy to pass, then she waited for him to return from the war, and then she waited for her to turn 20 years old. All this time they were postponing their wedding. She really hoped that he would propose to her soon, but 3 months had already passed since her 20th birthday, and he still had not asked for her hand. But Ricardo assured the man that since their families had made a promise, of course it had to be kept. The truth was that marriages between noble families were more often a symbol of trust and alliance than the result of true love. However, her feelings for Ricardo were real, and as soon as they were returning home in the carriage late in the evening, Bianca decided to talk to him. This conversation was about that awkward moment when they started talking about marriage over dinner. In fact, even when she said this, she saw his completely indifferent face, and because of this she was a little upset. But smiling, Bianca said that since the preparation would take a lot of time, it would be a good idea, in her opinion, to start doing it in advance. The man, hearing this, was a little surprised, but said that he heard her opposition. The girl understood that he still didn't care about this, so she asked directly whether they were planning to get married at all. The man said that this was probably true, but Bianca became very wary when she heard this. She immediately remembered the line from that book, where it said that the villainess squealed as soon as she heard it. And Bianca was really angry. She started raising her voice and asked if he had already gone back on his word to marry her. Ricardo was very surprised by her change of mood and said that he meant that since their families had made a promise, they should try to fulfill it. Well, the girl said that the contract between the houses was still in force, and that meant that he was her fiancé and they needed to move on. However, Ricardo suddenly said that this was not so. He was no longer her fiancé since they had to break off the engagement. As soon as the girl heard this, she was even more amazed. She was surprised when she found out that she had read about this a little earlier in a book. So she decided to change the subject and ask the man if he remembered the dog he raised as a child. The man, hearing this, became wary and asked how she knew about this at all. Bianca explained that she heard it, and when he asked someone about it, she said that at that moment it was not important. The most important thing was the essence of what she wanted to convey to him. In fact, in the book, when Ricardo saw how Maria looked at him with crazy trust, he remembered that very dog from his childhood. It was the first living creature he loved and trusted. So Bianca said that she thought it would be very nice to have a dog of the same breed. However, that in the books that this time the man refused, because no one could replace him. He also said that I should never try to replace someone, and this is a very important lesson. The rest of the trip they rode in silence. As soon as Bianca found herself in the estate, She immediately went to the library and took this terrible book that irritated her. She opened it and thought that perhaps this book was some kind of prophecy, but she wanted to pass it for sure. Everything was leading to Bianca being a villain, but she didn't understand how that was possible, and most importantly, why. The girl was incredibly angry. She considered it absurd and was even ready to tear the book to shreds. But as soon as the girl tried to do this, she noticed that it did not break, so she decided to burn it. But this did not work either. Even after a few minutes, she didn't even light up. Bianca didn't understand what was wrong with her and why this was happening. It didn't tear or burn, and as soon as Bianca took it out of the fire, she noticed that the book actually became cleaner. When she decided to accept this situation and realized that if this book was true, then these two must have met for the first time on St. George's Day. After that, they were supposed to fall madly in love with each other, and the girl would only interfere with their romance. Of course, she didn't want to clean up. She had beauty, wealth, and high status in society, and the girl didn't understand why all this was happening to her. Therefore, Bianca was seriously determined to find a way out of this situation. So the next morning, A, on the very first thing, picked up the book and began to reread it again. They knocked on her door, and as soon as they entered, they said that they had come to help as she had asked. The girl immediately put the book aside. In fact, after she reread it a few more times, she got to know her character better. In the book, Bianca was very selfish, and she was usually sure that Ricardo loved her, was overly wasteful, and considered herself the most beautiful woman in the world. She was a villain who was rude to those around her, despised people of lower status, and always insisted that she was right, even if she was not. As soon as the headmaid approached the lady, she immediately asked what she wanted to wear this morning. The girl, getting up from her seat, said that she didn't care. And when another maid asked how she should have arranged her hair, she said that Botha did it at her own discretion. Bianca still couldn't understand how someone like her could be a villain. It wasn't her fault that she was born so beautiful. After that, the maid brought her some jewelry. Bianca chose sapphires for that day. The girl did not understand at all what was wrong with her spending her own money, and also thought it strange that this strange book was looking for obvious facts. When the maid asked her mistress what shoes she was going to wear, Bianca asked if it was true what she had said yesterday, that she liked the white ones with decorations. The girl was a little surprised at first and asked her for forgiveness again. She began to tell her whole story, although the girl did not even ask for it. Bianca interrupted her and told her to calm down because she was going to wear those shoes that day. The maid, who had already said that if the girl fired her, she would be left without a livelihood, and therefore downright begged her not to do it. But as soon as she heard this, Bianca was very surprised and immediately asked where the girl's name was. The maid immediately gave her name. Her name was Panya Risolte. When the lady began to leave, she said that since she helped her choose a suitable pair of shoes, she could receive the butler's silver coin as a reward. The maid was amazed, but thanked the lady for her kindness and care, and said that she would never forget it. But before the maid left, Bianca also asked that she call the butler to her. When some time had passed since then, the man came to her room and asked my lady if she had called him. Bianca immediately said that it was true. She needed him to make some inquiries. She would like to know information about Maria Villona. She was a commoner from a town called Inchichi. The man was, of course, very surprised when she became interested in a commoner, but immediately asked what he was supposed to know. Of course, the first thing Bianca wanted to know was whether this girl even existed, and he also had to find out how old she was, what she looked like, and find out everything he could. The man quickly wrote down her instructions, and Bianca also said that the most important thing was that he knew what kind of relationship she had with Sir Wensbury. Since in the book Mary was presented as an illegitimate daughter, the girl had to find out whether this was true and, if necessary, prevent subsequent events. When the butler wrote everything down, he said that he would have done everything, and also asked if there was anything else he could do to help. Bianca immediately remembered and said that she wanted to know what he had heard about her own reputation. The man was a little surprised when he heard this question, but immediately said that the reputation was, of course, impeccable. She was not only beautiful, but she also had an elegance and wisdom that matched her beauty. He said that drinking was the flower of high society in the Spender Empire, But the girl interrupted him and said that it was not that at all. The man was even more surprised to hear this and asked what she had asked for then. The girl immediately said that she had meant her character. She wanted to know what her servants thought of her. The man immediately panicked, but said that of course they all loved her. But of course it was all a lie, and Bianca guessed that he was lying to her. But she soon let him go. Also, before leaving, she asked him to give a maid named Panya a silver coin. The man was a little surprised and asked if she had really done something very good since the girl was so generous. And Bianca immediately said that there was certainly something like that. But in fact, she just felt sorry for her because she didn't want to hear any more tearful stories about her family. But in addition to the silver coin, Bianca also asked him to send the rest of the bread to her home because she mentioned that her family was literally starving. When he left, the girl finally breathed a sigh of relief and could once again think about her difficult situation. It was quite obvious that her behavior was not perceived positively, but she did not know what to do. Of course, she did not want to turn into a villain, like in the book. After some time of self-flagellation, Bianca suddenly noticed that something was glowing on her table, and as soon as she looked at it, she saw that it was her book. At first, she was incredibly scared, and even ran away some distance because she believed that this book could somehow harm her. But she quickly got control of her emotions, and picking up the book, she really hoped that it would not explode. As soon as Bianca opened it, she suddenly saw that the story that was written there had immediately changed. At first, the book ended with Ricardo and Maria kissing passionately after Bianca's death. However, now that she looked at the ending, she saw that she continued to describe what happened next. The girl was very interested in this. It was written there that not a single troika grew up near the grave of the villain, who was buried after her death. While everyone avoided visiting her grave, believing it to be cursed, her maid showed a rare moment of kindness by placing a wildflower on her tombstone. But even he eventually took it and started it. As soon as Bianca read this, she immediately assumed that it was Panya who was the maid. She was never kind to the other maids. They were her servants, and she simply paid them for the work they did. The girl thought that their relationship ended there, but now history shows her from a different side, and it turns out that she was simply wrong. After she showed kindness to the maid, the story immediately changed because she did something she had never done before. After the girl analyzed all this, she realized that now she had to behave differently. Taking the bell for calling the maids in her hands, she immediately called Pani and asked her to prepare a carriage for her. The maid immediately asked where she was going, and Bianca replied that she wanted to go to the nearest orphanage for Shiro. The girl was finally going to do a good deed after all this time. The maid was amazed as soon as she heard this. But before they left, the girl also asked the maid to bring her a checkbook, as well as a lot of cash. Bianca was going to do a lot of good deeds that the villain would definitely not do, and thereby change the course of events. After some time, she arrived at the shelter and was a little surprised because it looked much better than she imagined. The lady immediately followed her and asked if my lady was absolutely sure of this. The girl did not understand what she was talking about, and the maid then explained that she thought that Bianca hated visiting such dirty and neglected places. But the girl didn't know why she called this place dirty, because everything around was well-groomed and neat. At that moment, two small children approached them and asked them who they were and who they were looking for. The maid approached the children and said that the girl behind her was Lady Bianca, and she wanted to talk to the director of this orphanage. The girl was a little surprised when she heard this. She said, of course, and immediately ran to the shelter calling the director. Bianca then turned to the maid and asked if they should have just gone inside, since the headmistress was in the building. But the girl said that she had already walked for quite a long time, and it would be right for the director himself to come out to meet them. At that moment, Bianca suddenly noticed that the little girl who was with that stranger was looking at her without taking her eyes off her. She became curious about who it was. But then the girl asked in a thin voice whether this beautiful lady was a princess. The maid was very scared as soon as she heard this, and immediately explained to the little girl that it was Lady Bianca. However, the girl suddenly became a little sad, and said that she was so beautiful, and wondered if she really wasn't a princess. Bianca thought that her situation could be compared to that of a princess from a neighboring kingdom, so she told the girl that she was practically like a princess. The little girl immediately became happy, and said that this is exactly what she thought. The girl really was a princess. She started pestering her, and Bianca already really regretted that she had said anything like that at all. But then suddenly, the little girl took her by the hand and began to pull her somewhere to the side, saying that it would be better for them to go inside. The maid then turned to the little girl and asked if she realized that she had touched anyone with her dirty hands. Bianca thought that even though her hands were dirty, for some reason it didn't make her feel disgusted. Then she came to the director of the shelter. Her name was Liana Sparta, and as soon as she saw this noble lady, she was amazed. She asked why such a lady had come to them. Bianca immediately explained that she wanted to support her shelter. The headmistress couldn't believe it, and also said that she was certainly grateful to her, but it was so unexpected that she didn't even know what to say to it. However, Bianca said that in return, she needed them to spread rumors that she was the one who sponsored the shelter. Liana was very surprised to hear this and asked what she meant. The girl explained that she wanted them to spread rumors that she sponsored this shelter. This could be done through children or even by hanging posters. In fact, Bianca needed to improve her public image at that moment, and she had to show everyone that she was not a villain at all. So she decided that telling the sponsor was the best way to carry out her plan. So she did it. Liana was a little surprised. However, she agreed with Milady and said that she would definitely take care of this issue personally. Bianca smiled happily and said that in that case she was ready to write her a check right then and there. After a while, they resolved a few more issues and went their separate ways. The headmistress accompanied the lady and thanked her for what she had done, because it meant so much to their shelter. She also said that this was more than enough to cover the costs of repairing the building, and they would even be able to buy new clothes for the children. She didn't even know how she could repay the lady for such kindness, but Bianca replied that these were all trifles, and she shouldn't worry so much. The woman also said that she shouldn't have worried about her request. They would have definitely told everyone about what happened. But at that moment, the girl suddenly stopped, and as soon as she saw Ricardo in front of her, she was very surprised, not understanding what he was doing there at all. The guy who was in sportswear saw her, and was himself very surprised, and asked if it was really her. His gaze suddenly became very angry, and he asked what she was doing in that place. He explained that she was not supposed to be in that place. Bianca froze in surprise and could not even respond to this. She even wondered who this man took her for, and how he, God, was angry with her because he accidentally ran into her in this place. She even wondered what he thought she could do with the orphanage, where the children were already having a hard time. But at that moment, a little girl who had fallen in love with Bianca ran out in front of her and told Ricardo not to be angry with this beautiful princess. Her name was Lala, and she said that if anyone was angry with the princess, she would put them on the list of big villains even if it was Ricardo, so she strongly advised him not to do it. Bianca was shocked to hear all this. Of course, she had been protected by many knights before, but she had never felt as safe as she did from this little girl. Then, the girl turned directly to Ricardo and said that if he did not want to be included on the list of big villains, then it would be better for him to retreat. The guy was shocked. He really didn't understand what happened then, but he gave in and retreated. Some time passed since then, and in the evening, Ricardo called Bianca to him for a talk. He asked her for forgiveness and said that he simply thought that she was following him and that this led him to draw the wrong conclusions. Bianca replied that everything was fine, but she thought to herself that the future Duke certainly shouldn't have apologized so easily. It was rather strange. However, the man asked why she suddenly wanted to sponsor an orphanage, since he thought that her family was not interested in charity. The girl said that it was certainly so, but she showed personal interest. When the guy heard this, you were even more surprised. Bianca made her own conclusions about this and asked if he really visited that place often, because she noticed that Lala called him by name, and it was clearly not the first time she saw him. The man immediately said that it was so, but the children did not know that he was a creator, and at that moment she understood the reason why Ricardo was dressed so simply. He did not want them to guess. He explained that they all thought that he was just a skilled swordsman who taught the boys there how to properly handle a sword for their own protection. Seeing Bianca's surprised expression, he said that quite a large number of commoners served in the knightly orders, and even if they did not receive high ranks, they would be able to earn money and live a stable life, and that is why he helped them. As soon as the girl heard this, she realized that he was specifically teaching them how to make money correctly, and not just giving them money. And she assumed that in the long term, this would really be much more effective. Since Ricardo was a famous swordsman in the Empire, his students were required to be competent, so she said that it was indeed a great idea. And besides, his letter of recommendation could help them join any order they wanted to choose. Bianca turned to him and asked if the girl had also been trained in the art of the sword. The guy explained that he taught this to those who wanted it, but it was very difficult for girls to become knights, and since they knew it themselves, they did not show much interest in it. Then the girl asked what the future prospects were for these girls. Ricardo was a little surprised by such questions, but said that he didn't know that the director was talking about them being married off upon reaching adulthood, or whether they were leaving to look for work in the city. Since they had no special skills, he assumed that they were most likely making ends meet through odd jobs. Bianca was amazed because she immediately imagined how the little girl she met at the orphanage had to earn money in the cold in order to survive. Of course, she was very sad to realize this fact, and she did not understand how they could all do this to these beautiful children. But at that moment, she suddenly wondered why she was so worried about a child she had just met. Bianca said she thought it was unfair that boys had the opportunity to become knights, while girls could only get by with odd jobs. The man, after listening to her position, said that becoming a knight and learning the art of the sword is not as easy as it might seem at first glance. He said that wars were really terrible. People died there, and houses turned into ruins, and wherever a person went, one could only hear cries of despair and death. Bianca, hearing all this, immediately became wary because Ricardo, as soon as he began to tell about all this, immediately became sad. He said that he vividly remembered the horror that he experienced when he was at war. The guy also said that sometimes all this came to him in his dreams. As soon as Bianca saw his eyes, they seemed empty to her. At one point, she even thought that they could simply disappear without a trace. She had never seen Ricardo so vulnerable. Then suddenly, the man, clenching his fists, said that in fact he taught children and sponsored an orphanage to atone for his sins. It was of course ironic that he encouraged children to become knights, knowing the horrors of war. But that was all he could offer them. Bianca realized at that moment that this man had been suffering alone all this time, and even in those moments when she felt ignored, he suffered and simply could not support her. The girl realized this fact that she would never be able to know exactly how he perceived life. She simply hoped that he would not be blown away by the wind. At that moment, as a form of support, the girl put her hand on his palm and said that she didn't know exactly what to say, but she was really worried. At that moment, to her great surprise, Ricardo did not push her hand aside, but on the contrary, covered it with his palm. After that, he looked straight into her eyes and, smiling tenderly, thanked her for this support. As soon as Bianca heard words of gratitude addressed to her, she could not believe it. No matter how hard she tried to become his duchess, she still couldn't get him to say those words. But now, he did it for the first time. Then suddenly, Ricardo said that that day, he saw her from a completely new side. The girl, a little embarrassed, said that she also learned a little something new about him, because it was the longest conversation they had ever had. Then, he suddenly became the first to extend his hand to help her stand up, and asked if she was ready to go. The girl accepted his help and began to think about how she had held his hand many times before, but had never felt his warmth. Before they parted, Pienkov remembered and said that Sir Wensbury was supposed to be holding a ball very soon, and the invitation was supposed to arrive before the end of that day. The man said that he understood everything, and that he would definitely come to her residence in order to accompany her there. As soon as they left the room, Ricardo suddenly moved closer to her, and, putting his hand on her cheek, said that for some reason she had turned very red. He immediately asked if she had accidentally fallen ill, but as soon as the girl heard these words, she became even more embarrassed. She immediately removed his hands from her and said that everything was fine. She had just spent too much time outdoors, and her body was not used to it. He doubted that she was okay, but she wasn't going to say anything else. Bianca immediately ran away from him so that there would be no more awkwardness, and she herself was amazed that Ricardo was looking clearly at her, and not through her. His eyes were definitely fixed on her, and because of this, her heart began to beat very fast. But she decided that it was a good sign, or a bad omen. She didn't know exactly, but she was going to think about it a little later. Some time passed since then, and Bianca finally received information about Maria from the butler. As it turned out, this girl really existed in real life, and Bianca still has not confirmed whether she was Sir Wensbury's illegitimate child. However, Maria really lived with her sick, renewed mother, and she also found out that Sir Wensbury went to Ankini to recover from the post-war trauma he received in his youth, and also that the maid who looked after him was, in fact, Maria's mother. All these facts that she learned were in perfect agreement with that book. Bianca understood that there was a high probability that everything else was also true, so she was already prepared for this. Of course, she didn't like the idea that this could mean that she really had to die, and this thought drove her crazy. Some time passed since then, and the girl arrived at the bookstore again. The seller, as soon as he saw her, immediately became happy and accompanied her, and also said that he was literally waiting for her to return. He handed her a rather large book, and Bianca immediately asked if it was really for her. Smiling happily, he said that this is exactly how he changed the seal, just as she recommended it to him. The man also explained that he had changed it only recently, so he wasn't sure if it was effective, but he had a good feeling. The girl said that she was glad to hear this, and also added that she came to buy a book. The man asked which one she would like to read. Bianca thoughtfully said that she needed a book about war trauma, psychological treatment of panic disorders, something like that. The girl asked him to bring her everything he had and immediately, because she did not have time for empty chatter. She also said that she was ready to buy out his entire store. The seller was a little scared, but immediately ran to look for the necessary options. Bianca, meanwhile, walked between the shelves and looked at the rest of the assortment. There was one book called The Adventures of the Dandelion Princess, and at that moment, she immediately thought of a little girl who was in an orphanage. She thought about how Lala really liked princesses, and the girl was even able to save her from Ricardo's wrath. So she decided that it would be nice to reward her. So while the seller was loading the books she requested into the carriage, she approached him and said that she would like something else. The girl pointed to the shelf behind her and said that she was ready to buy all the fairy tales that were there. The man was very surprised by this, but he happily sold it immediately. After that, Bianca went back to the shelter in order to give what was going to be given. However, there was an unexpected surprise waiting for her as she again crossed paths with Ricardo, who also did not expect to see her. The girl immediately asked if he often came to that place, but the Duke explained that he only went there if there was no emergency, and that 2 or 3 times a week the art of handling the ball only came with practice, so he needed to go more often. But then he asked what brought her to this place again. Bianca explained that she had bought several books for them. As soon as the man glanced into her carriage, he immediately asked if she really hadn't bought that much, although the entire carriage was littered with books. Bianca waved her hand and said that it was, indeed, a bit, Ricardo. Meanwhile began to wipe the sweat from his face, as he had just finished training, and said that he probably should have called the kids for help. As soon as she noticed this, she immediately became a little embarrassed, especially from the thoughts that came to her at that moment. In the meantime, the man called the children. Some time passed from that moment, and the boys began to unload the books from the carriage and also carry them to the shelter. And after that, the girl heard a loud cry of Lala, who ran out of the shelter and ran to meet Princess Bianca. As soon as she ran up to the woman, she immediately hugged her tightly and began to bombard her with a lot of questions. Lala also said that as soon as Nicole told her that the girl had arrived, she immediately ran from another part of the backyard to meet her. Hearing this indignation, Bianca doubted that she should have told her about it, but she just smiled and said that she had just arrived, so there was no need to worry. The little girl complimented her and told her how beautiful she was, and the drunk said that she knew it. But at that moment, she suddenly heard laughter from Ricardo, and as soon as she turned and looked at him, he pretended as if nothing had happened. The girl immediately became wary. She did not understand what was so funny about this, but at that moment, she was distracted by the voice of Lala, who addressed her. The girl whispered that the princess should tell her if Ricardo created problems for her again. She could mention her list of villains again, and then everything would settle down. Bianca sat down to be on the same level with the girl and asked if Lala really thought that Ricardo could be afraid of her, since she was so cute. But the girl protested and said that this was not true at all. She was actually very scary and asked if she would like to see this. Bianca said that she would love to see it, and then the girl growled. She thought it was incredibly cute and wondered if she should talk about it. Lala, immediately after she stopped growling, asked what she was thinking, whether she thought it was scary. But at that moment, Ricardo came up to her from behind, picked her up in his arms, and told her to be careful because he was a scary tiger. The girl immediately laughed loudly. Then the man looked her straight in the eyes and in a stern voice told her to stop bothering the princess. Lala was indignant when she heard this and said that she was not bothering her, but was trying to protect her. She said that if someone bothered her, she would definitely teach that person a lesson with her growling. Ricardo, hearing this, immediately smiled and said that in that case the princess was lucky that the girl was on her side. After that, he extended his hand to her to help her stand up. Bianca was under the impression for a while, but accepted his help. She happily accepted his help, and Layla, as soon as she saw this, immediately screamed that she had seen something similar in a fairy tale. By the part where the knight saved the princess, then she reconsidered her decision and said that in that case, Ricardo was indeed a knight, and not a villain as she had previously considered him. Her eyes literally sparkled with joy, and the girl asked if they should get married in that case. At that moment, Bianca thought that in fact the villain was the princess, and the only way out for the villain was, of course, death. But at that moment, Ricardo said that maybe they would have gotten married, and also asked if she would have come to their wedding if he and the princess had really done it. The girl was surprised. She didn't understand why he was saying all this, thereby essentially giving the girl false hope. But at that moment, Nicole ran out of the shelter and turned to Lael and said that the princess had brought them books. There were even books about the princesses themselves. As soon as the girl heard this, she beamed with joy and immediately ran to her and said that she would like to see all this. The man watched them walk away, smiling for a while. But at that moment, Bianca turned to him and asked why he said those things. Ricardo immediately became wary and asked if he couldn't say that, since the whole country knew that it was going to happen. Bianca replied that she thought he was interested in marriage, because whenever they discussed marriage, he always took a neutral position, saying that perhaps it would happen someday. And it wasn't that Ricardo was careless. He just didn't care about marrying her. And now he was talking about the wedding with a smile on his face, and to a little girl at that. She wondered what had made him change his mind at all. The man, in turn, replied that he admitted that he had not been very interested in all this until that moment. However, he never said that he would not do this. Bianca, hearing this, was sincerely surprised and could not believe that it was really true. She immediately asked him again what he meant. Then Ricardo said in a very serious voice that he had never told her that he would not marry her. The girl was amazed and even became interested in who he thought he was, since he said it with such pathos. She was about to answer him, but at that moment, Lala ran out of the shelter and turned to the girl, asking if she could read her a book. Bianca said that she was a little busy, so she suggested that she read everything herself. But the girl said that she did not know how to read, so the woman could not do it. Hearing this, she was sincerely surprised and asked why she did not know how to read. The little girl became a little sad and then said that it was because she didn't know exactly how it was supposed to be done. Ricardo, meanwhile, turned to her and asked why she didn't ask Nicole to read. The girl became a little sad and said that she just wanted Her Royal Highness to read this book to her. The man stroked her head and said that the girl would read to him later, but she was a good girl, so she could at least wait a little. Lala immediately smiled and said that she had been a good girl and then ran to Nicole to have her read to her. Meanwhile, the man turned to Bianca and said that most commoners' children didn't know how to read until they grew up. This information genuinely surprised her, and she asked why this was so. Ricardo replied that it was all because there was simply no one to teach them. The girl was puzzled and immediately asked if they didn't have nannies, private tutors, or even just an adult who could show them how to do it. The man said that this was not the case at all. Commoners' children were either raised by their mothers or grew up on their own. And orphans like Lala usually learn to read even later. Some would never even be able to achieve this. But Bianca was indignant and said that she had no intention of letting Lala grow up like that, because she was such a sweet child and deserved happiness. The girl sincerely did not understand how the girl could grow up on her own, because she was not a grass, and she needed to be raised and taught a lot of things. Then Bianca suddenly exclaimed and said that now it became clear to her why she could not understand from the word that Lala did not speak at all. Her thoughts were illogical, since she did not yet know how to read. The man was a little wary that she changed the subject so quickly and said that they were talking about the wedding. But she suddenly yelled at him and said that they could have talked about this later, because he had just said that Lala couldn't read, and this issue was much more important. Ricardo became wary and said that he thought she hated children, but the girl, to his surprise, said that this was not true at all. She explained that she simply did not approach them unless they approached her first, but in no way did she despise or hate them. Ricardo was stunned. He moved closer to her and asked if this was true, because all this time he thought that she couldn't stand them. Bianca had absolutely no idea what he was getting at, so she decided to change the subject and said that she wanted to talk to the principal about increasing funding so that they could hire a teacher. Without even waiting for an answer from her fiancé, she went straight to the shelter in order to immediately resolve this issue, because she didn't have much time. Then Ricardo sighed heavily and looked after her, and realized that he simply misunderstood everything, and that this misunderstanding had happened because of it. When several hours had passed since then, Bianca was about to go home to the estate, but the horse that was supposed to take her for some reason was stubborn. The coachman tried to calm him down, but he couldn't do anything about it, so he certainly couldn't take the girl away. But a carriage with Ricardo passed by them, and his coachman asked what had happened to them. The man immediately said that the horse simply did not move from the spot, and assumed that it was probably just tired of carrying all these books, which is why it was stubborn. Then Ricardo appeared from the window and said that it was not good, in which case he was ready to escort Lady Bianca to the Crawford residence. As soon as she saw his carriage, she was amazed and immediately assumed that he had brought the most modest carriage so that no one would know that he had come from the duchy. The coachman, hearing this suggestion, immediately became happy and thanked the man for it. But as soon as he turned to tell Milady that this was wonderful news, he saw her very angry look. Bianca was really angry that he didn't even ask her, but she soon calmed down and apologized for causing him inconvenience. When she sat down and transferred all her books to him in the carriage, they sat in silence for some time. In order to remove the awkwardness that had developed between them, Ricardo said that she had taken quite a lot of books for herself. The girl didn't even look at him and simply said that she had read quite a lot, so they would all be useful to her. The man said that he had, of course, heard rumors that she loved to read, but he had never thought that she might be interested in books about war and corpses. Bianca felt very awkward at that moment, because she had warned them not to bring these books into the carriage. Therefore, she immediately explained to the man that she bought them out of pure scientific interest. This certainly had nothing to do with him, so he might not even think about it. But the man was a little surprised that she told him about this, because he wanted to ask her about something completely different. Bianca felt very awkward about this and was ready to curse herself for such haste. He still asked what he wanted, and they rode in silence for the rest of the trip because the girls were really uncomfortable about it. When they returned to Ricardo, he thought about Bianca for quite a long time, because that day he saw her again from a completely different side for himself. She was beautiful, and at the same time an arrogant and power-hungry, cold noblewoman. That's exactly how he thought about her all the time. Her bride, who was destined to marry him and give birth to an heir from his line, all because of a promise that was made by their families. That's why he couldn't believe that Bianca didn't hate children, because he believed that it was precisely because of this duty that she could dislike everything that was connected with it. In fact, in the past, when they once attended a ball where a child was playing around and playing with dessert, Bianca reacted quite sharply to this. It really seemed to him that she looked at this child with great hatred and even condemnation, but he did not understand why, because of course it was a small child who did not understand anything, and it was quite natural that he made a mess. In fact, Ricardo once dreamed of such a life, to live long and happily with his next wife and a sweet child whom he would dote on. He wanted to pass on his title as heir to the Wencesser duchy and settle down in a quiet and secluded place with his family. But the reality was that no one else could take the position of heir, and he couldn't just up and leave his responsibilities by going to the village and forgetting about everything. So he at least wanted to just build a happy and peaceful family. This was the only desire that he kept even in the horrors of the war that he went through. However, Ricardo believed that as long as he remained a lesbian, this would certainly never have been possible. He believed that even if they had married, she would have been more concerned with her title as a duchess than with the fact that she was his wife. At least that's what he thought, until he saw a completely different side of her now. Ricardo noticed that Bianca had changed a lot, of course. She had always been a good person, but he had only known one side of her all this time, and it was not the most positive. Whenever he imagined his future family, his wife's face was always very blurry. However, now it began to clear up little by little. And now, when the man imagined a happy life, he saw Bianca next to him, and her face and body were in the role of his wife. This thought even consoled him, so he decided to start preparing for the wedding as soon as possible, since he had now made up his mind. Soon Bianca sent out some more information about Maria from the butler. She was a beautiful, kind, and unfortunate young lady who remained bright and cheerful despite terrible circumstances. The girl believed that it certainly was not easy to grow up without knowing her father, and that Maria had to endure poverty and abuse. But she still tried her best to overcome these difficulties and reach a new level of life. No matter how hard she studied, her opportunities were still limited to a one-day job or working as a maid to a noble family. Her financial situation did not improve in any way, despite hard work, and her single mother worked tirelessly, which is why she soon became ill. God was too cruel to give her a chance to fight further, but Mary worked hard and looked after her sick mother, even with a smile on her face. She even reminded Bianchi of Pani, who had to look after her father and younger sisters, and Lala, who smiled all the time, even when she was sad. But she still felt uneasy that such a sweet and innocent person like her had ended up turning her into a villain. This girl was also supposed to steal Ricardo's heart and start threatening her life. Bianca felt sick just thinking about it. The girl put aside the report that the butler had given her and thought about what she should do with this dubious situation. She couldn't save her without killing her, so she had to look for another way to prevent what was described in the book. Several days passed since then, and finally, the Wednesbury Ball arrived. Bianca wore a long green dress with white inserts to this event, and as soon as people saw her, they started giving her a lot of compliments because she was amazing. Bianca, meanwhile, approached Lady Evelina and asked her if she chewed something, because she looked simply luxurious. The woman smiled and said that it didn't matter to her no matter how much she preened. She could never compare to the most beautiful girl in the empire. Bianca smiled and kept up the conversation, but she herself noticed that the lady had a rather sly look, and she became interested in what she was interested in. After a long silence, Eveline said that she had heard that the girl was now involved in charity work. Bianca said that was indeed the case, and the woman replied that she had not thought that the Crawford family was interested in such a thing, and also asked if her house had not always stood for more practical values. Bianca immediately informed her that it was her personal interest, and the woman smiled and said that she had a big heart to do it. At that moment, the girl thought that since these rumors had reached Evelyn, the head mistress had told everyone about her. But she was incredibly happy about it. She wanted everyone to know how kind and sensitive she was, and how she cared for others. They continued their conversation, but suddenly Eveline noticed that Ricardo approached them and immediately turned her attention to him. Smiling happily, she greeted him and immediately asked how he was. He chewed. The man said that he was fine and bowed, and also greeted her. The woman complimented him, said that he looked absolutely gorgeous that day, and also wished him to enjoy the evening. After this, the lady went to her other guests and left the boy and the girl alone. Bianca realized at that moment that the various rumors were bound to spread much faster than even she had expected. But this fact even made her happy. Then suddenly, Ricardo turned to her and said that he had recently heard several rumors about her. The girl immediately asked what these rumors were. The man immediately said that he had heard that in addition to helping Sulphur there, she also helped homeless shelters and nursing homes. Bianca smiled and said that all this was really true, because this was her new interest, and she diligently did all this. Ricardo then suddenly asked why she suddenly became interested in doing good deeds, because he had never seen this in her before. The girl was a little surprised by such a question, and also saw a furious look in his eyes. He wanted to know about her true intentions, so she did not hide anything. Bianca immediately replied that it was all because she had a lot of money, and besides, she had always been a good person, but he most likely didn't notice it. Of course, she thought he was curious about why she had changed so much, but for her, it was truly perfect. This was her great chance to show everyone that she was a good person, completely different from what she had been before and what they all thought. As soon as Ricardo heard this, you immediately said that he understood everything, and also that he simply didn't know her very well, and therefore made hasty conclusions. After that, he extended his hand and asked if he could take her to the first dance. Of course, the girl was very surprised. She didn't understand what had come over him, because he had never even liked to dance. And besides, she had already danced with him before. But Bianca was not going to miss such a wonderful chance, and agreed. At that moment, the surrounding ladies noticed this spectacle and immediately began to talk among themselves. They said that the guy and the girl were simply an ideal couple and admired them. Then some rather calm music started playing, and as soon as they got into position to start dancing, Bianca smiled and said that it was her favorite song. The man simply said that he understood, and then they started dancing it. It was a perfect, very good, and beautiful dance between them. Bianca knew that she needed to find out more about Maria from Sir Wensbury himself anyway, so she was already thinking about how she could start this conversation. Of course, she couldn't just ask him directly. That would have been too rude and stupid on her part. The girl gradually began to move closer to the man, and then suddenly, Ricardo asked what she was thinking about. The girl did not specifically answer his question, because she had no desire to, and understood that it would still be too suspicious on her part. But then the man suddenly asked if she wasn't supposed to be focused on her partner when she danced. Bianca was very surprised by these words. She did not understand why he behaved like this at all. It was definitely not like him. Then she wondered if it was really as if they were truly in love when they looked into each other's eyes during the dance. He always looked over her shoulders when they danced, and although at first she looked at him, gradually her gaze shifted to his collar because it was awkward. However, now, when they were dancing, Ricardo looked straight at her, and as soon as she looked back at him, he smiled and said that it was much better this way. The girl understood that this was not the Ricardo she knew, and then suddenly he grabbed her by the waist and pulled her as close to him as possible so that this dance would become even more graceful. This even made Bianca a little worried. Then he suddenly whispered that she looked very beautiful that day. Her cheeks turned red again from embarrassment. She looked at him and did not understand whether he really said such a phrase to her. They danced for a while longer. When the music stopped, Bianca said that she needed to touch up her makeup, so she had to leave. The man, of course, did not object and let her go. But the whole time she was in his field of vision, he looked at her. As soon as Bianca entered the ladies' room, she looked at herself and saw a really red face from embarrassment. She had absolutely no idea what had come over her. She even thought about the fact that she dressed and looked so beautiful that for some reason he even began to like her, which was completely unnatural. She decided that it was impossible, because during the years they had been engaged, she had always been very beautiful. Bianca knew that it couldn't be that he would suddenly, out of the blue, fall in love with her, so she decided that he was simply mistaken. The girl stayed in the bathroom for a while, after which she calmed down and left, heading back to the ballroom so as not to disappear among the guests. Bianca then heard a familiar voice speaking to her and immediately recognized him. This man was very annoying and she did not want to cross paths with him. She even thought that she just needed to walk faster into the hall and then she would get lost in the large number of people who were dancing. However, the man came closer to her and, putting his hand on her shoulder, smiled and told her not to ignore him, because in this way she hurt his feelings.